Okay, I had a lot of people emailing me questions on my website about what handles you need, particularly for the outside assembly, for the handle and the star, the washers that go inside and outside. What is the orientation? Which washers do you need and which ones you don't need? So I'm just going to do a real quick breakdown of the washers, proper assembly, and troubleshoot some problems that typically occur when it's not assembled in the correct fashion or if you're missing the proper parts. So what I have here is a 546. It's a Newell P series. I've got the aftermarket Shimano modified handle. I'm going to take this thing apart. I've already loosened this handle nut. I'm going to give you a side profile view of the basic assembly. So on the inside of the star is what we call the lock washers. On the outside of the star, you can either have a tension washer and then the handle washer, or you can leave the tension washer out, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then I'll break down the proper order. So I already loosened this cap nut prior. So you take the cap nut off, you take off the little rubber seal, put that on the side. So Newell made two bridge plates, one that takes a screw, and then the other bridge plate takes clips. So this is the bridge plate that takes a clip, if you can see it there. So this one happens to take the screw, and I sell both of these parts on my website. I sell both the bridge stem clips and the bridge stem screws. That's that little screw that came off. Before I get into the washer assembly, the clip or the screw, whichever one your reel takes, it's very important that you have it on there. For instance, this reel, it's a bridge plate. I've got the gear sleeve on, and if you don't have the screw, or if the screw's loose, or if you don't have the clips, let's say your reel was the one that has the clips, the bridge plate, the screw holds the gear sleeve down on top of the bridge plate. So it actually keeps the gear sleeve from lifting. So if the gear sleeve lifts, the dogs would slip under, and then your anti-reverse would fail. So it's one of the common mistakes people make is when they put it back together, they forget to put the screw back on. Or if you take clips for your bridge stem, some reels take one clip, some take two. But if you don't have the clips here, or you don't have the right amount of clips, your gear sleeve can lift. It can lift up slightly, just enough to create a gap right there, and then it's just enough for the dog to wedge inside, and then your anti-reverse will fail. And the typical symptom is when the drags are backed off, it works fine, but when you tighten the drags down, it's binding, and that's usually because of this. Common mistake, and it's something very important to make sure you've got the top fastened correctly, nice and tight. Its job is to hold the gear sleeve down so it doesn't lift, so that way the dogs can engage onto the sprocket properly. Okay, so that's the bridge plates. So once we get the screw, the nut off, what we're left here is, what you see first is a handle washer. And let me take this off so you can see, it's kind of hard to see. This is the handle washer right here. This is a slotted handle washer. Okay. This is an aftermarket handle I've got on. Newell would have been using these two. The graphite handles, they utilize a handle washer on the top, but you still need one for the bottom. And it doesn't matter which one you use. They made two different types. They made a sort of a kind of curved, and then they made a slotted. And so if you can see that, it doesn't matter which one. I like the slotted. It provides a tighter, snug fit, and that's what I prefer to put on my handles, but it's all preference. But for the graphite handles, they'll have one on the top, but you still need one on the bottom. Okay. If you've got a P series handle, it's going to be right there on the top like that. So when you take your screw and your cap nut off, you should have a handle washer on the top. If you've got a graphite handle, don't worry, it's built in on the top. Okay, so we're going to put that handle washer down. You're going to take off your handle, and then you've got another handle washer. So there's a handle washer on top, you've got your handle, and then you got your handle washer underneath. Those two washers are important to have primarily because, one, the handle washer on the bottom, there's a notch on the gear sleeve right there. It's kind of hard to see. It's a little step. And basically, this handle washer stops the handle from going down any further. So it can't come down anymore. It provides a locking point for the handle. So when you've got the handle on, the other handle washer, and it's screwed down, it's basically locked down onto that step. It's very important that if you're using a tension washer, which looks like this, they typically look like one of these two. A tension washer can look kind of wavy like this. It's really thin and wavy, kind of crinkly looking. Or it can look sort of like this, kind of a real thin, it's got a bevel to it. Typically though, you'll see these crinkly looking ones. Those tension washers are sometimes found in between the star and your handle washer. And what its job is basically when you're backing off the star, it provides a little bit of pressure against the star. I typically just remove those. I don't like to use them at all because it ends up scratching up your star, and sometimes if you don't maintain your reel enough, it can get stuck to some of the other parts. And then they also crack. They're so thin, they end up cracking, and you end up replacing them anyway. And their only real job is basically just some tension when the star is backed off, and 9 times out of 10 you're not fishing with the star backed off that much. So to me, it's preference, but I don't even use them. But when you've got your star assembled on top, you want to make sure that your star is not passing that notch. So that notch right there, you want to make sure the star is not past it, because then now your slotted handle washer has nothing to sit on. It's actually sitting on the star, and that's bad because the star moves. Okay. The other reason why it's important to make sure you have both slotted washers, top and bottom, right? Top and bottom, one on the top, one on the bottom, is because the thread depth on the gear sleeve, if you just put the handle on and you don't have the right amount of washers in there, so the 2 slotted washers, basically this cap nut will just keep spinning because it has nothing to seat up against. It's got a set depth and it can only go so deep. It can't just keep going and going and going and going. So it has to eventually hit something in order for it to lock up and hold. So putting the washer on the notch, putting your handle, and putting the second washer gives it just enough depth to make contact, and then it can start to lock onto the gear sleeve. If you're missing washers, typically what will happen is this thing will be loose and it'll spin and it'll feel like it can't ever tighten down. And that's why. It's because you don't have enough washers on there. Maybe you're missing one. Remember now, the graphite already has one on the top, so you don't need one for the top. You just need for the bottom. But all the other handles, like the aluminum, the P series, and aftermarket handles like this, they need top and bottom. Okay, so we've got our cap nut, we got our screw, we got our handle washer here, we got our handle, we got the next slotted handle washer, and what we're left with is the star. Like I said, sometimes people use these tension washers underneath, but I typically don't use them. But if you do find them, they usually are, and they should be, placed after the slotted handle washer. Okay? And then I'll go through this one more time. Take off your star. And the stars, if you're wondering, there's usually a taller edge on one side, and it happens to be this side. That's the side that faces in. Okay. And now the last set of washers is what we call the lock washers, and that's the washers that go underneath the star, or the inside of the star, and they look like this. They basically have a semi-square slotted opening. Let me see if I can get that camera to focus. If you can see that. Okay, so that's the slotted washer. They're usually thinner, and like I said, they're slotted on the sides, and then they round up on the top, and it basically mimics the shape of the gear sleeve. If you can see that. Some reels will vary on how many lock washers they take. For instance, a graphite star is a lot thicker than an aluminum star, so you're not going to be able to put as many lock washers in there. And Newell also made aluminum stars thicker than other stars. So reels will typically vary from 1 lock washer all the way up until like 3 or 4 lock washers. And the factory made different size lock washers. They made thicker ones and they made thinner ones. I carry the it's an in between. It's in between the thick and the thin. It's sort of like a medium thickness. And I went one step further. When I had these custom made, I went ahead and I had them heat treated. So these are actually harder and stronger than the stock factory ones at the same comparable size. So that's the good thing about these. The main purpose of those lock washers is basically to maintain the drag pressure from the star. They transfer it to the gear, the drag spacer, which is the brass piece that goes all the way underneath here. That brass piece in there, that's the spacer. So these washers basically help to transfer the pressure down onto the spacer, which goes on top of your drag stack. So it can actually aid, and it sort of helps maintain your drag pressure. If your star is particularly a narrower star and it doesn't have a pronounced bevel or a mounting point, the lock washers, that's where they come in. It's basically an extension of the star once it's bolted down. And that's why they need to be slotted like this, is so that they're not spinning. Yeah, if you just had a round washer in there, all it's doing is just basically a shim or a spacer. It's just taking up space. The other benefit to the shims is that it does keep the star spaced away from the bearing cap a little bit. Some stars actually come pretty close to these bearing caps, and so the lock washers can give it a little bit of some room, some clearance for the bearing cap. Although it's not always needed. Majority of the time they don't ever hit. But if you do tighten it down a lot, they do get pretty close, and it can be very difficult to take off the removable bearing caps if the star is that close. So yeah, so I'm gonna go through it one more time, the assembly. Some common mistakes that people make is they put these tension washers, the spring tension washers, they put them under the star, you know, so you'll see like a fatter washer underneath, or they'll put the crinkly washer underneath the star, and that basically doesn't do any good, and eventually, I mean, these things are just going to crack. So the tension washers should only go in between the star and the handle washer. Okay, so I'm going to lay this stuff out so you can see the order of it, and then that's it. That will sum it up. Okay, so I'm going to grab the camera and show the order, and this is what you can go off of. Okay, so once again, we've got our handle nut, right, with your rubber seal. You got your bridge stem screw or clip, depending. I mean, if you use a clip, you're gonna have yours is gonna look something like this, but just make sure you've got it. Otherwise, your gear sleeve can rise up and the dogs can slip under. And like I said, I sell these screws and I sell the clips on my website. And then you've got the top slotted washer. You've got your handle, be it an aftermarket handle, this type of handle, the P-series aluminum handle. Then you've got your washer underneath, right there. The other washer, your second slotted washer for the handle. So there's the two slotted. You got your star. Make sure the taller part faces in. And then you've got your lock washers. This reel happens to take, I think 4. So you've got your lock washers. The fourth one is on top of my gear sleeve. And that's basically a good washer assembly. Your handle's nice and locked down onto the gear sleeve. It's not moving anywhere. You've got your cap nut and your screw secured properly, and your star is pressing in against your lock washers. I'm going to put it all together in a gear sleeve so you can see exactly what it looks like. We'll put this down. Okay, so I'm going to take this gear sleeve here. I've got a spare, and I've got a spacer right here. This is the spacer that would be going on top of the reel, right over there. Okay, so we're going to put our lock washers on top. Then your star. And make sure when you're putting your star on, you want to look at it and thread it on so it's... let's fix these lock washers here for a second. They're rising up. You want to put it on so it's nice and level, and it spins on, and it's not cross-threading. So when you're looking at it, it should be level. You shouldn't see the star crooked at all, because you can strip your gear sleeve that way. It is brass. You can cross-thread these things. Okay. And then now you've got your bottom slotted handle washer. You've got your handle. You've got your top slotted handle washer. And then here is where you'd put your screw or your clip or whatever. Let's just assume I put it on. And then your cap nut. And same thing like the star. Make sure when you're putting this on, it's not cross-threading you. Okay, and I am going to show exactly what that looks like. So if you were to take your gear sleeve off of your reel, that's exactly what it would look like. Yeah. So we got our handle, followed by the two slotted. There is a gap over here. If you don't like the gap or you like some tension over there, that's where you can put your tension washer. And then you've got your lock washers underneath and your spacer. Okay, so I'm going to assemble the reel, and then that's it. That wraps it up. Let's take this off. I sell both the lock washers and the handle washers on my website. The handle washers are sold in sets of 2, because typically handles will take 2, unless you have a graphite handle that only takes 1. And the lock washers come in a set of 4. Let's put that back. Okay, so let's put this all back on the reel. Put our lock washers first. Then we're going to put our star, and you make sure that it's sitting nice and level and that's not going on crooked. Not all stars spin freely like this. You know, this one just happens to be kind of clean, but some stars can get stuck. And you got to just hold the sleeve, and it just depends on the threads. Okay, slotted washer, handle, your next slotted washer. Now don't forget your stem screw. Screw that in. And then your cap nut. And you're just going to screw that on. Make sure it's nice and tight. Okay? And for my particular reel, there's a little bit of a gap in between my star and my handle, and that's fine. Like I said, I don't like to use the tension washers just because they crack, and I tend to see my stars get more scratched up, and I've seen, particularly in the Newell colored reels, the star and the handle, the tension washer freezes up on top of it because of corrosion and electrolysis and whatnot. So I usually just don't even use them because they end up cracking. But I do carry the slotted handle washers, and I do carry the lock washers on my website. But that's sums up the washer assembly, the correct order, some common problems that people encounter with them, and you know, the basic function of them and how you should have them. Like I said, the main thing is that your star does not pass that notch on the gear sleeve, which is right there, because that's where your handle washer needs to sit, and it basically allows the handle to sit properly and just bolt right on there. Okay, so when you put your lock washers on in your star, just make sure it's not passing that notch. Okay, and that's it. Check out our website, LuaJunkies.com. We're always getting more parts in, and we're always trying to figure out ways to help the fishermen and educate them, and just expand the knowledge base. If you have any questions or you're interested in anything, you can check out the website, or you can contact me on the website. There's a contact form, shoot me an email, and I look forward to talking with you and meeting all the customers. Okay, thanks a lot.